So today's episode is tools I wish I had. And
Mhm.
my live guest, because we have some video guests too, but my live guest for this episode is Jeanette Keynes. And Jeanette, I'd like you to introduce yourself and just tell them what you do and how you got here so we can kick off with your background.
I've been a metalsmith for 30 years. I took one class here at Jewelry Arts, and it was just literally blew my little tiny mind. And I thought it was the most fun I ever had. And I never left. That was it. I was just like, this is my jam. I eventually heard about the apprenticeship program that's here because that's how we train all of our teachers. And I approached the owner. She was very underwhelmed, but I'm persistent. And sooner or later, she cracked under the pressure, and I became an apprentice and then an instructor. And then in 2009, when the former owner was retiring, I felt like this place had been so important to me and to a lot of people that I couldn't let it close. So I eventually bought the studio. So now I'm the chief cook and bottle washer here. Um, Metal smithing is my entire life. I love it more than anything, and it gets more. I get more obsessive, if possible, every year. Um, yeah, it just keeps getting worse and worse. So that's why I'm here. I love everything about metalsmithing and about teaching and sharing information. It's really, like I said, my whole life. So that's why I'm here, and I plan on doing it until I get carried out.
I mean, metalsmithing's an expensive habit, so it's a good thing you turned it into a business.
Yeah, you gotta do something, right? I mean, you gotta somehow.
So Jeanette and I were talking before we opened up the room to you folks, and I was saying we put out an inquiry to the whole jewelry industry through several different mechanisms, just saying if there's a tool you wish you had, um, or a tool that you've adapted, let us know. We'll do a quick 10-15 minute interview and um, share your insights on this episode. And the response was underwhelming. And so I was sharing, we did get some fun stuff to share with you, but I was sharing that with Jeanette, and she said, I know why that is. So why is that, Jeanette?
When you said that, my first thought was, oh, because they don't know they need it.
They don't know they need a tool.
They don't know they need it. That's what it is. It's that a lot of times, especially students, they blame themselves. If they're having a hard time with the technique, they don't say to themselves, wow, this tool is lousy. They say, wow, I'm a lousy metalsmith. And it's only with time and experience that you start to be able to separate out what's operator error, which, I error all the time, and what's the failure of your tools. So what you find is it's only the people that have really done it for a long time in general, not that a newcomer couldn't have a great idea, but generally speaking, newcomers blame themselves. The old timers say, wow, this tool is crap and I need something better.
Wait, are you saying that I can blame all the saw blades I break on my saw?
Yes.
I feel so much better already.
But that's normally what I find is that's what the divide is. And that's why teaching is so important to me because students generally blame themselves. And it's not that, of course, I'm sure they don't, you have to practice and learn and get better, but they just don't know enough to know that it's not their damn fault.
That's actually very encouraging. So then how do you address that in the classroom? Because I think that gives more people more ideas about how to address it at their own bench. Because I can see in this room, we have seasoned jewelers. See, I don't use the word old anymore. We have seasoned jewelers, and we have some that are, I think, pretty early in their careers. So how do you help them see it?
Well, I think that's a big part of being a teacher because I remember when I was an apprentice and when I was, more new to this than I am now, that I would just be struggling, and my teacher would say, "Oh no, look at that, no, you know what I mean?" And she would snatch it up and file it a little or adjust it a little. And my only goal when I was learning is that, like, I want to be a master someday. Someday I want to be a master. So I paid pretty close attention, and I would notice how often the most experienced teachers would never just use any tool laying around. They would say we need this specifically on my bench, etc. Or and they would look at my stuff and go, oh, for the love of God. And we would go do a little adjustments. And a lot of times these weren't complicated things too. I mean, half the time we just took a scriber and adjusted the end a tiny bit and then did it. But it was something that I saw constantly. They wouldn't just use whatever was in front of them. And that's kind of what started to really show me like this is really important, and it's something that I need to pay very close attention to understand, and something that I try in class to think of their tools like a paintbrush. Like if you're drawing and you need a thin line and you use a thick brush, it's not going to work, right? And if you start to visualize tools in that same way, like I need to make a mark that looks exactly like ... It's just like using a charcoal pencil instead of a big paintbrush. Like that's not your fault. That's just the wrong tool.
Wrong tool for the job.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember the first time I set up a bench, and I didn't learn to make jewelry until I was running a jewelry company. And so I wanted to know how to do the work. And set up a bench and had my fresh, shiny new bench pin on there. And a guy named Thackeray, great bench jeweler, came into the office and looked at it. He said, this will never do. And he started filing my bench pin. And I'm like, you're desecrating my bench pin. And he's like, it can't work for you until you adapt it. Do you remember the first tool that you ever adapted?
I think it was literally just a scriber, just a metal tool where we were trying to, I don't even know what we were trying to do at this point, but I remember my teacher would be like, and be like, let's sand that edge, like it's too sharp. We just need to take that sharp pointy edge a little bit off. And then we were probably trying to just, repousse a little something or just make a little poof of some kind. And you really have to look carefully at your tools and look at the mark that they're going to make. I mean, I think I have so many scribers now with just, well, it's a little flatter on one side. It's a little sharper. It's a little more polished. And I mean, obviously I've gotten better, one hopes, at adjusting my tools. But a lot of times it's just that, as seeing a tool as just the rough version. A lot of times when you're getting a tool, it's not really ready to use. It's just sort of the basic form. And it needs to be polished or ground down a little. Or, the handles, you know what I mean? All the experienced jewelers out there I know are going like, oh, the handles.
The handles. You can't get off, put something else on, right?
To adjust it for your hand so that it's comfortable. Because jewelry manufacturers generally make everything really big so that it fits everyone, which means, of course, actually it fits practically no one.
And certainly not all these women jewelers, right?
99% of our students are women. So that's a big thing right there, that like the handles are crazy too long, too wide, so that's like something we go after immediately. Like, are you comfortable holding it? No. And the handle's too big, kind of a thing.
I remember Tim Sheriff at a Catalog in Motion event. He was demonstrating something and somebody came up and said, the tools are so small. And he said, well, you're not repairing cars with them. Like, so it was just the right response.
Fair assessment, yes.
I'd also like to invite our audience to drop into the chat ideas about tools or memories of the first tool you adapted, or any wishes you had for tools that you just think should exist on the market without adaptation. So please pop your comments and insights into the chat box. So which type of tool do you have like the most on your bench in multiple adapted states?
Well, for example, I have 1,000 pair of tweezers because I am unlearnable and I stick them into the flame. So even though that's a lot of times with students, I notice they're worried about a more complex tool. And I'm like, you don't have anything to pick anything up with. So if you can't pick up anything, you know what I mean? We can't get anywhere. So a lot of times it's really simple stuff like that, where I'm like, where are your tweezers, and can you actually pick something up with them? And I'm always abusing mine. And I ended up designing a set of tweezers to make me happy, which is a lot of times what I use in the studio. But a lot of times I feel like it's not even so much that they have to be the perfect tweezers, but like, do the ends meet? Have you looked at them lately? You know, kind of a thing. It's so funny how a lot of times we think of solutions when most of the time, like 90% of the time, it's like take a second, look at the end of your tweezer, do the ends actually meet? You know, like, most of the time solutions are very simple rather than complex, you know?
Yep. Fair enough. Though, as a segue, I'm going to actually show you guys a fairly complex tool right now. So Jane Redman has come up with a tool to solve some more complex problems. I'm going to be sharing a YouTube video with you guys, and I don't control the sound. You audience members do. So you're going to need to hover over the bot. If you can't hear the sound when I turn the video on, hover your mouse over the bottom, or your finger, whatever, over the bottom of the video screen, and make sure that that little speaker icon doesn't have a line through it. If it has a line through it, turn the speaker on and you'll be able to hear the sound. So I'm going to share that now. Then we'll come back and talk about this tool. It takes just a second for it to power up. I promise you it's really here. I feel like I should be doing, like, I don't know, music from that game show. Do, 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 do. I mean, YouTube knows it's supposed to be present.
Excellent. Mute.
So starting back at the beginning, you know, basically I started teaching about 15 or so years ago and needed tools to give to my students to use during workshops, and also for them to have to continue on with what they had learned, which meant that I needed to find someone to manufacture these tools for me, because there really wasn't anything that I felt was suitable out there in the marketplace. So I was teaching workshops in making blanking dies, or pancake dies, which some people call them, and decided to manufacture a really nice big work surface that was rotational, because you need to be able to rotate your work surface in order to create a blanking die. So that was the first tool that I created. And then others have simply come, again, thinking about, gee, I wish I had this tool. And for instance, I have a wire and tube cutting jig that's really quite unique, that allows me to work with longer pieces of material and also work hands-free, which is always kind of a big thing for me, to be able to use my tools in a very easy manner. You know, we're all getting older, and we're all, you know, working with, you know, with wear and tear on our eyes and our fingers and neck and shoulders and that sort of thing. So I'm kind of constantly aware of, you know, how can I modify something to make it more comfortable to use, or maybe invent something to make a process easier. So this is the first tool that I developed, which is my rotational bench pin, and it has a mounting bracket that works with a dovetail mounting system. So GRS has them. I have my own that I've developed, a mounting plate. New Concepts makes them. So we all kind of work with each other's specifications here. So inside there I have inside here I have a socket head screw that allows me to loosen up this dovetail mounting adapter here so that the work surface can rotate. And then of course I had to make other lovely surfaces to go with that. So here's the purple heartwood surface. And of course, as I started working with my own products, I started modifying them. So I did things like I made an extra little V here for smaller, drilling holes in the top, to have all of my flex shaft accessories right here in front of me instead of groping around on my bench top. Here is the wire and cutting jig, which has a dovetail stop, so I can move that back and forth. And what this does is this sets the length of your piece of tubing or your wire. And there's a saw guide right here on the end as well. And this can be used left-handed or right-handed by simply taking the screw out, putting it in the opposite way, and it has these little stops that fit in place. So you can use it with the saw blade coming in from one side or from the other side. And then you can take this off entirely so that now I can flush cut wire just by clipping right off the end there. More recently, I was approached by Tim Sheriff from Swanstrom Tools, who had an idea for a very revolutionary type of sawing mechanism that he thought would be perfect for blanking die. So we started collaborating. And the latest tool that is really hot off the press, in fact, it's not even on my website, is this one, which is, I'll take the ring out first here. So this is a system using a ring that can rotate. So here's my blanking die, and when I'm sawing, I am just holding my saw blade straight up and down, and then I'm turning my piece into the saw blade, which means that I make all of those wonderful little minute corrections and movements to create really fabulous detail and accuracy. This has been a total game changer. This is called the Jane Redman rotational work ring system, and it was designed by Tim Sheriff of Swanstrom Tools with my collaboration. And as I was working with it, I decided I'd take it a little bit further, and rather than just using it for large pieces of material, I wanted to be able to use it for smaller ones as well. I designed Jane's slider clamps that allow me to work with any size, shape, and thickness of material here within the center of the ring. So that again is really quite a game changer, I think. It certainly makes my life easier. This system is very, very easy to use. I'm not having to push down on it at all. It's really a very relaxed way of working. Another wonderful idea that Tim had was to create an adapter for all of the little circle clamps that work with the Swanstrom saw plate system. This screws in from the back, and then all of the little clamps can go in place here for much smaller pieces of metal. So here are a few others that will fit in as well. And then here's the Gary's clamp, which is a very wonderful concept where these little arms move so that they can go in and out and hang on to very small pieces of material. I teach workshops in making tools, actually, and making custom tools so that students can optimize their production. Some of those items that we work on in the Tools and Jigs workshop are, for instance, these wonderful little jigs that allow us to make ear wires or other findings or even components so that we can reproduce the same shape over and over again without worrying about having to, to fight with the right side and the left side matching. So I also have a series. Okay, so my plier stand is connected here, but this is something that I designed as well. And as part of my Tools and Jigs workshop, I show students how to modify pliers. And let's see. Good example of pliers that I modified to create perfect loops each and every time. So that's kind of a standard. Every time I make a loop with my little groove that's 1 down or 2 down or 3 down from the tip, I know that I will have the same inside diameter, which is a wonderful thing. Some other pliers that I work with are these fabulous Delrin pliers that won't mar your wire as you're bending it. And so these, of course, are easy to modify just by using cylinder burrs or files. Another one is a little kind of similar to the looping pliers. These pliers actually make a taper on the end of a tubing that is clamping onto the end of a coil, neck wire coil. It creates that crimp so that there's a variation between width going down from the tubing onto the coil. So it's a really nice sleek look. So again, all pieces that or tools that are designed really because of necessity. I haven't been making so much jewelry these days. I've been really spending my time teaching and tool designing. And particularly since Tim Sheriff got in touch with me, and we've been having wonderful conversations about, oh, what if we did this and what if we did that? And really fabulous to have someone else to talk with about that. So often we're kind of isolated in our studios, and collaborating is just a fabulous, wonderful exchange.
That was some fun stuff. My goodness.
I love all those pliers, boy. That's a lot of pliers.
It's like every jeweler's bench. It's like they have, the fact that she's got them on a rack, I think, is helpful. It kind of makes me crazy in manufacturing environments, and you'll see like 30 pliers on a bench. It's where's your work surface? But works for them. You've invented some tools that share with our audience some of the information about the tools that you've put together, because you knew there was more than just an individual need for them.
Well, like when I was learning, jewelry arts is based on ancient jewelry making techniques, although really handmade jewelry is all ancient techniques. You know what I mean? I was fascinated by granulation and filigree and all of those gorgeous hollow bead forms, like the acorn and all of those gorgeous shapes. And there really was no convenient way to make them, because in ancient times, the master would carve out of a solid block of bronze all of those shapes and hammer the metal into them. So that was a tool that we certainly had no access to. I mean, the closest example is like if you have a dapping block with all the little circles in it and you use that to make a hollow ball. Well, that's great if you want a circle. What if you want an acorn? What if you want, all those gorgeous shapes that they made? And I always really, really, really wanted those shapes and wanted to be able to make those forms. And I wanted them to be light and hollow.
Right.
Because, you can use a hydraulic press, which is a super cool tool, and you can make all kinds of things, but generally that requires a heavier metal. Now, I am no different than the metalsmith 4,000 years ago. I want to have hollow forms that are nice and light. So that's really about 3 years ago. I finally decided, after, experimenting with some tool making and things like that, and, like making my setting tools, for example, that I'm like, I'm going after the white whale. I want to make these dies so that people in the studio can make these hollow forms, acorns, you know what I mean? Like I said, all those great shapes, and it doesn't exist as a tool. And it took me about 3 years of extensive experimentation. I had to learn to work in CAD because, frankly, my wax carving skills are like, meh, that's not really, me, the torch, we're super close. With wax, I'm kind of like, I'm adequate, but it's not my tour de force for sure. And so I was able to eventually make these two-part, like this is just one tiny example, two-part, couldn't be more simple. You hammer the metal in between, and you can make hollow forms. Like I have a bunch of them. I have some of the bigger ones here to show you. For example, you can make all different hollow beads. Like these are based exactly on the beads that Queen Puabi wore in Mesopotamia, because I was always so inspired by those beautiful ancient forms, and you couldn't make them. There was no practical way to make
No
them.
practical or economical,
Yeah,
sure.
that's the thing. I mean, like, I can't say you couldn't make them, but there was no practical way to do it. So for me, this was like my dream, and now I've made them, and we can make these hollow beads just like the ancient metalsmiths did. You can make a gorgeous acorn. You can make, I mean, I don't know, maybe you can't see so well in the camera, but basically I can make all of those ancient inspired designs hollow and light out of 30 gauge metal, and I can incorporate them into my work. And like, why should we have less than a metalsmith had 3,000 years ago? I mean, that's just bold, you know what I mean? So for me, that was like my big dream. And when I was able to launch, just I guess about 6 months ago, the Queen Puabi collection, I just felt like, I mean, hopefully there's lots more, in my future, but I felt like I'd really achieved something that I'd wanted for 30 years, that I had wanted the whole time, was the ability to do that. And I'm utterly obsessed and constantly making new designs. And I mean, die forming is super ancient, obviously. It's really, most of the time, it's not about inventing the wheel. It's just like, oh, we already knew how to do that, but then we forgot how to do that. And we don't really do it that way anymore because that's too inexpensive and practical. You know what I'm saying? So I'm always like, it's Hoskins. It's good enough for me, 100%. So that's part of my inspiration. It's just amazing to be able to, I want to be able to make anything. I want to be able to make anything. I don't want to be held back. And that's why I think a lot of more experienced metalsmiths get obsessed with tools, like Jane, because you need to be able to control your tools to be able to make what you want. And you don't want to be limited anymore by, well, I can only do this, or my hammer's only so big, or it's only so this, or it's only so that. You want more freedom. And if you want freedom, you have to control your tools. So that's why I think you're going to see that more and more with more experienced jewelers, and also hopefully newer ones too, because they may have amazing ideas that, I never thought of, or Jane never thought of. I guess, to be a jeweler is to be a control freak, right? I mean, right? I mean, that's what I think.
When you make these tools, you not only make it possible for yourself to make things, you actually make it possible for all the other bench jewelers to make things. Like for Jane, to be able to team up with Tim Sheriff. And by the way, for those of you who don't know him, Tim is the unsung genius tool engineer of the industry, in my opinion. He has done so much tool design, but he kind of, sits in the background and just gets his patents and makes his tools. But boy, does he have an interesting mind. Anyway, Jane was able to hook up with Swanstrom, who of course has this massive tool and die shop and can make tools. What did you have to do to take your idea and turn it into something that could be produced for other people? Because that's not easy.
I had to do it myself because the modern dye industry, which is incredible, is geared toward more modern types of production. and using things like a hydraulic press, which a hydraulic press is an amazing tool, but it's super expensive. So for me, I'm like, I don't think it's really. I don't want to be saying to my student, "Oh, sure, you can make this, but you have to get a press first." I was like, "What did the Etruscans have? They had a rock and a stick, you know."
Maybe
What's a hammer?
rocks.
What's a hammer? A rock and a stick. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, I want it to be like that. Some of the most beautiful jewelry the world has ever seen was made with that slightly modified rock and stick. So I don't know why that's not practical for me as well. So I figured I had to make it myself, and I did. And what I found out was that, like, although you can make tools in steel, which is amazing and great, and I use steel all the time, of course, but you don't have to. You can, if you're working in thinner metals and softer metals, you can work in white brass, and it's plenty hard enough for what you need to do. And it makes them not quite as expensive, because as it is, it's not like a particularly inexpensive process to, make the original. So what I'm doing is I'm designing the original models in CAD and having them printed in white brass, and then I'm cleaning it up within an inch of its life and testing it 6,000 times. I mean, all of you out there are going, oh, yeah. All the testing that goes through with these things. And then I'm actually able to have them cast. I'm having everything produced right here in New York, which is also good because it's always good to keep, a close eyeball on everything. So I was able to actually, partner with the caster right here in New York. And I, of course, work with Tevel at Allcraft, and he helps distribute everything and he handles all of that. So, I'm lucky I have great people I can work with, but I sort of had to produce them myself, so to speak.
That's it takes a lot of like fortitude to just say I'm going to go forward and make a tool. I know it does. We some of our audience is weighing in with their tool observations. I want to share them in case you guys aren't looking at the chat. So Munya's saying, so I used to order single pointed scribers made by General, but they haven't been available for several years. So she has students use them when she's teaching a spiral loop, which is a knitted chain. She discovered that Guess Wine will soon be supplying a single pointed scriber, but she's not sure it will have the point that she wants. So what she's looking for is a single pointed scriber with no shoulder at the tip, just a nice gradual 1 5/8 inch taper. And
Nice
she's looking for her sample from Guess Wine, and she'll let us know if it's what she's looking for. So tool suppliers and manufacturers that are listening into this, there's a need.
Yeah.
And then Carol is saying she has these tools and Jeanette's stone setting tools also. And they're all wonderful, that she thinks they'll help young folks prevent use arthritis in the future. And they are definitely giving Carol an extension for working with arthritis now. And that's another important thing, is that your tools can help extend strength by having the right leverage, extend life of use by taking some of the beating for your body. The ring device on the bench pin is so helpful when cutting designs out of tool steel of a variety of thicknesses, and the clamps allow, I thought those were so cool. The clamps allow cutting thick acrylic and Delrin, which Carol designs as forms for producing final metal forms. And she said the tube cutter can be bolted to the bench pins by removing one of the screws and bolting the tube cutter to it in the desired position and reducing the tension from holding the handles and keeping the holder closed with one hand while cutting with the other in the typical handle tube wire cutter. So, and she says Jeanette's very fortunate in her collaborations also. So those are, that's fun to hear how you're using that.
Work for you. I think people forget that.
That the tools are supposed to work for you, that you're not just supposed to be trying to manage the tools. I mean, a good tool is ultimately, it's part of the design.
And you sort of forget about it. Like a good tool, you can forget about, because you can just work and it just does what it's supposed to do. And yes, it should be doing the heavy lifting for you. It should be applying all the pressure. Your hands should just be guiding, not, what I mean, doing that with sort of, I'm always tell people, like, stop punching, like relax and let the tool do the work for you.
That might be why I break all those saw blades.
Yes.
It's not really the fault of the soft frame. Okay.
Stop clenching, relax a little bit.
Just flow with it. Yep. Fair enough. I knew it was me. I'm going to show you a pitch for another tool that a jeweler wishes we had. And it's not a hand tool, but it goes back to something Jeanette said just a couple of minutes ago about how a tool helps you expand what you're capable of. So when Sharon Zimmerman sent a note and said, I want to pitch a tool that's not a hand tool or a bench tool, and are you open to it? I thought, yeah, because this is something that jewelers also need if you want to keep doing what you're doing and not have it be an expensive hobby. So bear with while I power this up again.
One of the tools that I could see a lot of my clients needing, and something that would have certainly helped me over the years, is something that really did more to incorporate inventory, CRM, that's customer relations management, and like invoicing, like kind of like an all-in-one, almost like a dashboard. And the thing is, so, I've worked in small business for a long time, and I've worked in jewelry for a long time too. And I've kind of done both. And I'm doing more on the small business advising end of my career now. And, one of the things that I've recognized is that for small businesses who are like just starting out, a lot of people get involved in jewelry because they're passionate about it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have, like, say, administrative skills yet, right? Yeah. It's a part of their work that they might still be working on and might still be developing. And what they need are actually like simpler tools that can still function for them. Inventory management across the jewelry industry is a hodgepodge of interestingness. It's fascinating. And, inventory is actually something that I talk about with my clients. It's something I talk about with my audience. It's something I talk about with small business owners outside of the jewelry industry too, because it is the thing you need. It's the engine that runs your business because it's the thing that makes you sales. And it is also the thing that sucks up the most of your cash flow. We just don't have a lot of like great tools. Like there are some that do exist now, but it does sort of lack, say, like the dashboard effect, that sort of like instant visual effect. Something that says like pretty quickly, like you spent this money at Tucson in 2019, and here's what sold from that batch, right? Like what percentage of like something that gives like a little like bit of a quick hit. Process of learning how to run, operate, and strategize for a small business is not like, I'm actually somebody who had to learn that myself. It's not an instant thing, but a lot of the tools that exist are so complex that I think that it makes people feel like they're not in control, right? Because they think, well, I don't understand this, so maybe I just won't think about it. And so like having some tools that are maybe a little bit more built for people, with a little bit more intuition into how people think and how people operate and how people perceive information. So visuals, but also maybe like some simplified terms so that people understand, or like little definitions. Definitely think like a simplified system, or if one of these existing systems could add more like dashboard information, that would be a change that I would love to see, but especially around inventory.
Are we back? For some reason, my screen is grayed out. Can you guys see us okay?
I can see you.
You can see me? Okay, something weird is happening on my end. So Sharon's absolutely right that being able to manage the business side of the business, there aren't great systems tools. And so people end up doing everything with spreadsheets, which means you're making it up as you go. And you spend so much time doing administration that you don't get to be where you want to be, which is at the bench. You're creating those things to sell. So I thought that was a fair pitch. Al is asking if he said this is a jewelry repair question. Is there a fixture or holding device for holding hollow gold chain while soldering or lasering? One thing I thought of, but you'll probably have more ideas, Jeanette, or anybody in the audience can weigh in, is Karen Christians came up with her Cleverworks soldering set. And they're made of titanium. They're very lightweight, and they have a a particular geometry in the handle to give you good grip without too much pressure. So that's one thing I thought of. Carol's suggesting locking tweezers. Any other suggestions for Al, Jeanette?
Well, the whole thing is about the force. So, I mean, because that's why cross-locking tweezers often are not good, because they're either too tight or they're too loose.
Right.
So, I'm not familiar with the specific tool that you mentioned, but anything where you can adjust the tension of how hard it's holding it, that's really what it's all about. Because usually that's the whole problem. You know, either it's so tight that it's going to crush your hollow form, especially if you're working with anything hollow. So yeah, anything adjustable, you know, I would certainly go toward that and try that out, because that's the whole problem with the third arm. I mean, the third arm is like the most universally needed yet loathed piece of equipment. You know what I mean, at the bench. And you do see a lot of good options out there, but I don't know that any of us ever feel like, well, here's the one answer to that.
This is it, right?
Yeah. And it is, it's all about being able to adjust the tension, really, in a fast, you know, easy way. Can you just take a moment, adjust it so that it's holding it just tight enough? I mean, that's like the holy grail right there, really.
Yeah. What tools are you working on right now?
Let's see, I'm working on more of the hollow form dies, because there's so many beautiful like Greek and Etruscan and design. So like that's going to keep me busy for the next, you know, 50 or 60 years. So that'll just be an ongoing thing. But I've had these texturing setting tools for the longest time. The handmade ones that I make, if I do say so myself, are amazing, because bezel settings are something that a huge amount of people do, but then they're just like, okay, well, there it is. I'm like, well, it can be so much more interesting. You can do all kinds of fun textures, and it's not that hard to do. But again, there's not a tool out there. So the tool itself is done as far as I'm concerned, but that's where, you know, that's the first 5 minutes. You know what I mean? All the rest of the time is getting your manufacturer to be able to make them reliably just the way you want. So that's what I've been working on. I mean, I'll tell you, that's usually a few years easily to get something just the way you want it to. Because normally the first thing I do, you know, I just used tool steel, carved them up the way I wanted them. You know, these are tools I've been using for years and years, and I know they work. But then it's getting them produced, you know, to that same level of quality and whatever. So, I mean, that's what I've been working on in the background, because I think, you know, a bezel setting is a beautiful and classic thing, but it can be so many other things too. You can use it to do this like amazing, like sort of shipwrecked finish, which I think is fantastic. And, you know, not really any harder than doing a regular setting, but you have to have the right tool. So that's one thing that, you know, and when will it launch? The eternal question, you know what I mean? When it's ready is always the answer to that.
What is one tool, and I'm curious to hear from the audience as well, that is always modified? Nobody makes this tool, but it seems like every jeweler has this modified thing on their bench.
I mean, probably I would say setting tools. I mean, that's why I made the set that I did, because setting tools are just, they're almost not even a blank. They're pretty much just a piece of steel and maybe a handle attached, and then you have to adjust everything to fit you. Scribers also, I mean, it's just like you start off with the basics, and then how many things do you do with a basic scriber that you then just modify it a little bit? It's never quite right. The taper is too thick, or the end is too pointy, or not pointy enough, or, you know, so I feel like that's something that most jewelers, you know, you're never using that just the way it is. I mean, we adjust hammers a lot too, but I think more people tend to just use them the way they are, because again, I think they don't necessarily know how to adjust them.
I see a lot less modified hammers. I see a ton of modified pliers and a ton of modified scribers and tweezers. But how do you modify a hammer?
So many ways. I mean, really, all you need is a separating disc. A lot of times, though, you just need to reshape it a little bit because the curve might not be quite right. It's super easy also to make texturing hammers. If you've got, how we all have a few hammers that are hanging there that maybe they're not your favorite anymore. Those are the ones that you're going to want to play around with doing a texture on. That way you can just quickly grab it, and in a minute or two, you've got a cuff with some fantastic texture on it that, again, it's not commercially available, so you're going to use a ball burr and take that to the end, or a separating disc. Like I said, give me 5 minutes with a separating disc, and you can do so many things, or they're too polished or they're not polished enough. I mean, I just feel like there's always you hit something and you see the market makes and you go, oh, well, just a little something, because it's really no different than a pair of pliers. Because yes, of course, we're all taking our pliers and tearing those poor things apart and marking them and drilling them and grinding them, because yeah, if I want to make 600 jump rings all the same size, you darn right I'm going to at least need to put like a little nick on my round nose pliers, or stretch them to the exact same point. I mean, there's very few things, let me just say, that don't need some modifying.
To modify. So sometimes, oh, Carol's asking a question. She said, are you making tools for hollow forms for handling them?
For handling, for holding them?
I think it might go back to the tweezer question. I'm not positive. And Carol, feel free to clarify.
Well, like for example, we also made little handmade titanium stands to hold the beads while we fuse them or solder them.
Used them? Okay.
Because if you've ever noticed, people make these titanium stands and they're enormous. And I'm like, oh, what kind of
jewelry? I know. It's like, where are you putting that?
Like, oh darn, I'm not making a helmet today. You know what I mean? So actually, all the titanium stands to hold the beads for fusing and soldering, we just literally hang them in the studio because they're not that complicated. But again, for some reason, I feel like so many jewelry manufacturers, like, what am I making that's this big? Like, the tools need to be like little. Little. To work on is little. And I feel like that's the most consistent thing that I come across with hammers, with setting tools, with whatever. It's like, who is making what that makes you think I need, a setting tool that's this long, or like, all those things. Everything just seems to be so big, so oversized. I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Carol said it was when she heard you mention the term hollow forms, but she didn't hear what the comment was about. When I asked you what you were working on for tools now. So I think it was related to that tweezer question. So I remember once walking into a production area and a guy named Tyler Teague was working on something. And I said, why does it smell like silly putty in here? And he said, because I'm using silly putty. So he was using silly putty as a tool. What are some of the weirder things you end up using or teaching your students to use for tools? Silly putty might be one of them. Huh?
The first thing I'll tell you is a thing that I never have my students use, which is in the old instruction sheets from the studio, because the studio's been around next year will be 50 years. They had, I found some of the old instruction sheets which said to dampen your hand and take a nice handful of asbestos and
It's amazing most jewelers are still alive. Anyone that started practicing before 1980 is just like lucky to be alive.
So I never tell anyone to do that. But you're right. And I'm trying to think, we use chopsticks a lot because they're nice, hard, we'll stick them in the pencil sharpener to get a nice sharp point on them. It's amazing what you can do with a chopstick. I mean, I feel like we're always telling people, do you have extra chopsticks at home? Just bring them into the studio. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, just so many weird things, because also another thing that all jewelers will tell you, if something is made specific for jewelry making, it's usually more expensive. So a lot of times, if you're looking for a material, you're not necessarily going to go jeweler's supply. You're going to go to, MSC, right? Like, and get, I mean, we make our own quince seed extract for enameling, which works because Cellini wrote about it, and he wrote about how to use it in his treatises. And I'm like, well, let's get a couple quince seeds and see what happens. And of course, it works like a charm, better than anything that I could buy. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of reading of ancient things and then try out the recipes and be amazed how well a lot of those things work. So we've got all kinds of weird substances in the studio.
For tools.
Yes, that too. Let's be honest, but I'm sure we're on a watch list of some kind somewhere.
For your studio.
Yeah.
Munya just shared, she said, I live for my forming pliers, and the only ones that work for her are made by Tronex. Like Jeanette said, all the others need to be modified. The flat side is too wide or too thick. Tevel actually had Tronex make those for her, and I think everyone should have a pair. Round pliers make nicks in the wire, but forming pliers do not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love Tronex. They really make nice pliers. Because that's usually what I find. Most parallel pliers are like, what kind of bezels are you making? For the boulder, like most of the time, everything is just too big, and I just think, I don't know what everyone else is making, but I'm making jewelry that I can wear on my body. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know what people are doing with all these like enormous tools.
Enormous tools.
Yeah.
I'm looking to see if anyone else if you guys have questions for Jeanette or questions for each other, pop them in the chat. So what's the thing you're thinking about that you need to make because you're tired of adapting it one by one every time, but it's not on your list yet? Oh, and while you're thinking, Carol says, maybe you're explaining why I seem to be working larger and larger. Well, Carol, for me, it's my eyesight, but it might be the tools.
Yeah, I just got a few tools, which I won't name, but that I'm supposed to test out. And I'm like, but why are they so big? I don't understand. I mean, literally, I feel like that's the most common thing that we all are like, why is everything so enormous? Like, I can't understand it. So I put that out there for all people who are manufacturing jewelry tools. Like, we make jewelry, right?
Well, and not just that. You said earlier, 99% of your students are women.
Yes.
I remember being in the studio at Alan Revere, because that's where I went to learn how to make jewelry. So we're talking late 90s, maybe. It's a while ago. And he told me then, every year, there are more and more women in my classroom. The jewelry industry, jewelers are women now. And jewelry manufacturers, tool and equipment manufacturers need to recognize that women's hands are different and they use their arm strength differently.
Yeah.
And so that's a very important thing for our tool manufacturers to be thinking about, is that they have to be amenable to the women bench jewelers.
Yeah. Well, and I can also say from my personal experience, I hope I'm not too indelicate. I have big boobs. I don't want to work up against
This close against the bench.
bench pin. And it's like a jewelry bench is designed for a man and not. So I really don't like a lot of traditional and jewelers benches and the way that they try to teach you to work, which is with your boobs right up against.
Because you're working right here. Women complain about this all the time. So this may be a surprise to the men in our audience, but it is not a surprise to any of the women.
Yeah. So I apologize to the men who are like, I did not come here to talk about Jeanette's boobs, but it's a huge thing for us. And I mean, I'm always the first thing. I certainly use a bench pin, of course, but the first thing I do when I sit down at somebody's bench is take it out.
Take it out.
I use it when I need it, but I do not want to work up against there. And that's just another one of those like physical things that, yes. And for us, I don't know why. We certainly don't on purpose try to like drive men away, but 99% of our students have always been women. And yet things are not designed for us. And that's
it's
like
true across the whole industry.
Yeah. So like, I'm always like, forget that thing with the bench pin. I use it when I need to, but otherwise I am not getting poked with that thing 500 times a day. Like, no, thank you. And that is something that I feel like there's always like a surprise or something, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, well, I won't say the indelicate way that I relate this to students, because I'll try to keep it a little cleaned up here. But I don't think men would like a similar scenario if it presented,
Piece of equipment, right?
shall we say, I'll just leave it like that. But yeah, I mean, so like our benches in our studio that we had built are not like traditional jewelers benches because I don't find that comfortable even a little tiny bit.
So what are you using for benches then? How are you approaching that?
Well, we just had our benches are made a little bit so that the bench itself is a little lower. We're sitting a little higher. We have room for bench pin right there when you need to saw and stuff like that. But that's not what you're not just living over that bench pin all the time because it is just not comfortable. I also tend to think, like, I don't know about anybody else, but like, I think I have like T-Rex arms. Like, my arms aren't that long. I can't be behind that bench pin and
And working all the way out here, right?
I can't reach that far. I don't know like I said, I don't know what everyone else is doing. I need to work right under my nose. And if the bench pin's keeping me out here and I'm soldering, like that just does not physically work for me. Everybody has to find their own groove. But just remember that, like, if you're having a problem, I guarantee you, you're not the only one. I guarantee you, there are millions of other people that are having that same problem. And yet somehow students always immediately just say, it's me.
It's me.
And that's something that's a philosophical issue that I guess this can't really conquer today. But like, why does everyone think it's them?
Because we're trained, I don't know, through education, I think, to think that when we're taught something, we're supposed to know it immediately. Well, no, that's why we're being taught. That's why we're learning. Sharon Zimmerman did that in her video. I don't know if you caught it. She said they're not good at administration yet.
Yes.
That word yet is such an important part of the learning process.
Well, I'll just say this. I've been a jeweler for like 31 years. I'm not that good at that yet either. That's like
Yep.
the part that's so important that most of us, shall we say, don't really enjoy because, of course, we just want to do our art. In a perfect world, I've never met an artist yet that didn't want to just be in a room by themselves or with a couple other artists and just slide their stuff out under the door and an anonymous hand just slides an envelope with cash back. That's
the tool you wish you had right there.
That's literally what we all want. And then we're like, oh, so that's not going to work. Oh, damn. Okay. And then we all sort of gradually accept like that we have to keep control of our inventory and promote ourselves and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I've never yet met an artist that didn't really just want that.
Yeah, and where did those patrons go anyway? There's like no patrons for artists anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing, but they're not supporting me at any rate.
Well, that was fun. And the hour just disappeared on us because clearly we could talk about tools all day. Our audience stuck around. So I think you guys could talk about tools all day. So takeaways from this session, if it's not working, it's not, don't assume it's you unless it's me with saw blades, but otherwise don't assume it's you. It could actually be your tool. The tool needs to be adapted. It's okay to, permission. It is okay to have a bunch of tools on your bench adapted for particular uses. Like, never feel guilty about how many tools you have if they've been, if you're modifying things for a particular purpose. It's faster to grab the tool you've modified. And collaborate, like seek each other out with tool ideas and help each other get the tools you need, but also make them available to this next generation of jewelers that we're trying so very hard to cultivate.
Yeah, why should they have to struggle?
Why? Yeah, let's give them the tools. All the tools. Oh, thank you.
With all the tools.
So I want to thank you, Jeanette, for making this so fun and interesting and educational. You've been a great guest today. And I want to thank Jane and Sharon for contributing their tool ideas to us. I would love to do this session again sometime. So for all of you in the audience, please let us know that you've got tool ideas or desires or something to share, because we would love to share it with the MJSA and jewelry community. This is our last webinar for 2023. We're going to pick it up again in January the 18th, I think, where we're going to talk about digital marketing for B2B, because that's different than digital marketing for B2C. Next year, we're going to be talking about AI. We're going to be talking about materials for responsible design. We're going to be talking about, we're going to have a session called Metal Nerds. Selling is a strategic advantage. So we're going to talk about the whole range of business and making the way we always do. So that comes back to you on January the 18th. And in the meantime, keep your eye open if you're not getting MJSA emails, because we have some very exciting things coming at MJSA Expo, including going back to our Confab Education Conference, for which will be the day before Expo starts, and then lots of really cool things happening on the Expo floor. So yeah, that's what's going on. Any parting words for our audience, Jeanette?
Happy soldering.
Happy soldering. It is the season for soldering. It really is. Carol, I don't think Expo's planning to be hybrid. Well, no, we will live stream a bunch of things from the floor. There will be actually, okay, so there's a lot that's happening at Expo that's hybrid in terms of quick tips, in terms like quick education tips on how to make things. And also our exhibitors will be doing some pitches. But there's also a lot that's not hybrid. So if you can be there, we really want you to be there with us, because it's going to be a lot of fun and a different Expo than you've seen recently. So
I learned so much at the MJSA expos over the years. I feel like I cut my teeth there. You know, like I would go and fondle all the tools, you know, and see the demo. I mean, I feel like, I mean, it really is a huge part. I mean, I still partake, but it was a huge part of my education. It really was. I really learned so much from that, seeing and talking to the others. Because that's the thing, we have all the information. We just have to share it with each other.
we do.
You know?
We do, because we are our own best. We are each other's best teachers.
Yes.
So yes, last answer, Carol. Yes, it's in New York. It's at the Javits. It's co-locating with JA. So it'll be March 10 to 12th. And there will be a pre-conference on March 9th called Confab. So, all right. Thanks again. Thanks, Jeanette. Thanks to our audience. It was great to see you all. And hopefully I'll see and hear from you all soon.